Whereas case control study is one, and whereas a case control study is one where you go retrospectively, that is backwards in time. Both the exposure and both the disease have occurred, and then you are looking at it. Whereas in cohort, you go forward in time. The exposure will occur over years of time, and then also, and again the disease will be manifested in, may or may not be manifested in the population. So what exactly here are the advantages? As both the disease and effect have and the cause have occurred, so it is really easy to carry out. You just have to go to the hospital, or you just have to go to the records, and you just have to go to the population and ask questions. That's it. You don't have to wait for years altogether, and then keep on following up, and then keep on collecting the data again and again. As it is just as both those things have occurred, and you are just collecting the information, it is really inexpensive and rapid in comparison to other studies. Also, the easy to carry out, it is a comparative sense, like in comparison to other study designs. Then few subjects are required comparatively, and also the ethical problems in this case are really minimal in case of case control studies. So basically, what I think you have got what exactly case control studies are. So I would like to just discuss two examples here, which have got a really historical importance in the this case control studies. While explaining, means they are really discussed. So a particular example of interest is adenocarcinoma of vagina. So what adenocarcinoma of vagina? It is a rare disease in itself, and it mostly occurs in women who are over 50 years of age. Okay. But an unusual occurrence was reported in Boston, USA, in a hospital where seven women between the age group of 15 to 22 years, mind it is a very young population in comparison to which the disease is normally seen to occur. In those population, the occurrence of adenocarcinoma of vagina was found. So, means how exactly the gynecological association of that area took keen interest, and they were like such previous occurrence had never been reported before. So, what exactly was the cause of this disease? So, in that case, they used case control study, and a case control study was conducted in the year 1971. So what they did was they went back in time. Now these women, they were 15 to 22 years of age. They went back in time to the time when they took birth, when they were in the fetal life, or when they took birth as small children. So what they found was what they did was selection of. I will look at stepwise. You will means easy for you to understand. So first is cases and controls. They did the selection of cases and controls. In that case, the cases were those women who had adenocarcinoma of vagina as of now. So those people were the cases. Who were the controls? For every one women as case, they took four controls. Okay, for everyone, they took four controls who were similar to them in all the aspects. Like they had got their delivery done in that particular hospital itself, and the outcome was a female child, and other factors were the same. Then matching was done to reduce all of these biases. As I have said, they did the matching by making as many aspects similar as possible. Then the measurement of exposure. So they wanted to see what exactly caused this effect. So they looked at some certain things that could be that according to them would have been the cause of that. Like they looked at the maternal age of the mothers of these women at that time. They looked whether it was associated with any smoking in the mother. They looked at any radiological antenatal radiological history. Also, they looked at exposure to diethylstilbestrol in the fetal period. So what they found was the means these seven women, and also one more woman was there in another hospital of Boston. So eight women in total who were the cases. So that translates to 32 controls in this case, in this particular study. So out of the 40 individuals, and out of the eight cases, had seven women had their had an exposure to diethylstilbestrol in the fetal life in their to their mother, and out of the 32 controls, none of them had any exposure. So that was a really great finding. Like first, it was diethylstilbestrol. It was administered to reduce miscarriage and to avoid abortions. But people didn't knew that it may cause a certain mishappening in further years to come. So the case control study method played a critical role in revealing the cause of vaginal adenocarcinoma 10 to 20 years later than the exposure. So like you can see the real importance. Like it wouldn't have been possible in any way to first to go prospectively in this case. The only method was to go retrospectively, and a particular rare occurrence and particular unexpected occurrence was found to be related to a particular exposure of diethylstilbestrol. So it is one example. The second one is the thalidomide tragedy. Like all of you might be familiar with this one. What exactly happened and all. Thalidomide was marketed as a safe, non-barbiturate hypnotic in Great Britain in the year 1958. In 1961, attention was drawn to the birth of a large number of babies with congenital abnormalities, which was previously rare. Again, a case control study, they found that a certain number of babies were found to have particular disease. They selected cases, they selected controls, they did the matching between them, and they went back in time and found the exposures. And in that case, different things like in the previous case, maternal age and all were considered. Here also similar factors were considered, and one factor was exposure to the administration of thalidomide in early pregnancy. So that is it. Retrospective study was done, and it found exposure to thalidomide during early pregnancy in the mothers who delivered deformed babies. So, means case control studies in themselves have got really, really great importance in the study designs where we can't go much more forward in time, and where it is not easily possible, and there is a means many biases are bound to happen. So in that case, they are really, really helpful. So I guess the basics of case control studies are sort of clear. What exactly are case control studies? They are retrospective studies going back in time, selecting the cases, selecting the controls, and then selecting the exposure, doing the matching, and doing the analysis and interpretation. And that's it. And advantages are also really, really good. So I guess with these two examples, it might be clear to what exactly are case control studies. And there is, I guess, the pre-club session would end.
Yes, thank you, Akash. Moving ahead, we welcome Dr. Smriti Bajpai ma'am, who has joined us as judge for the club. Before starting the presentation, I would like to tell you all the rules for the same. The topic of the presentation is selected only after thorough literature search in the guidance and subsequent approval by the subject mentors of the presenters should be within the scope of health sciences. Each presentation will be of maximum 15 minutes, followed by a 10 minutes long feedback and questions round by the faculty. It is a sincere request to all the attendees to keep their mics off while the presentation is going on. No one is allowed to speak in between. Those having any doubts can wait for the presentation to get over and can directly ask or type in the chat box. We shall now begin with the first presentation. Muskan, are you there?
Yes, am I clearly audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'll start sharing my screen. Okay, is it visible?
Yeah.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Muskan Chabria, first year MBBS from SAGE GSMC and KEM Hospital, and today I'll be presenting to you critical appraisal of case control study of human papillomaviruses and cervical cancer in Latin America. This study was published in the International Journal of Cancer on 15th October 1987, which implies that it has a high impact factor. Human papillomaviruses have been found at various anatomical sites in the body. Out of them, HPV 6, 11, 16, and 18 have been found to infect the genital tract. And based on frequent findings of HPV 16 and 18 DNA sequences in cervical lesions, they are associated with cervical cancer. So, this is a landmark article, and after the establishment of this article, many HPV vaccines have become available to the public, which provide protection against 2, 4, or 9 strains of HPV. So, coming to the introduction, I would like to briefly introduced the 5 components commonly called as the P, I, C, O, and T, which respectively stand for population, intervention, control, outcome, and time duration. The population under study were Latin American women from Panama, Costa Rica, and Bogota in Colombia. Intervention was standardized interviews were conducted for the study participants. There were two age-matched controls by a 5-year age gap for each case. So for each case, there were two controls and they were randomly selected, which suggests minimum selection bias. The outcome was positive association between HPV infection and invasive cervical cancer. However, the primary outcome was not clearly mentioned. The time duration was between July and September 1985. Now, the study mentions the need to redo the trial because the earlier trials were uncontrolled, observational. They were conducted in populations at low risk for invasive cancer. There were small number of patients. P-value has been mentioned at appropriate places, whereas the confidence interval has not been mentioned where needed. So this is a case control study. Now, as the name suggests, case control. So there are two groups. One is case and one is control. Cases are those which have developed the disease and controls are disease free. So in a case control study, we start from the disease and we go back in time to measure the possible risk factors or exposures. The inclusion and exclusion criteria for cases and controls have been clearly defined. Women with newly diagnosed invasive cervical cancer with diagnosis confirmed histopathologically have been included as cases, whereas women who have received prior treatment for cancer, who were older than 69 years of age, who had not been residents of the defined study area for at least 6 months, have been excluded from the cases. The inclusion criteria for controls were female controls within 5-year age group. There were two controls for each case. Women with previous diagnosis of cancer who had hysterectomy done, who had endocrine or smoking related diseases, and who had current cervical pathology were excluded from the controls. Now, as mentioned earlier, there were supposed to be two controls for each case, but at the end of the study, there were only 51 controls for 46 cases, which was a limitation of the study due to time, logistics, and other constraints. Data collection. The records were assessed by coding for computer data processing. 1 out of 20 cases in Panama could not participate in the study due to language problems, and there were geographical barriers too. So that was a limitation of the study. In case of controls, the cell samples were collected from the cervical os, and for cases, they were collected from the cervical lesions by cotton tip swabs. Detection of HPV DNA sequences was done by a method known as filter in situ DNA-DNA hybridization. Now, this method is considered superior to the Southern blotting assay for testing large number of specimens, and it also has an advantage in that it does not require biopsy and thus facilitates sampling for normal controls as well. Recombinant plasmids containing PBR322 and HPV 16, 18, 6C or 11 DNA were also used. Coming to statistical analysis, so the odds ratio has been approximated as the relative risk. The study utilized the chi-square test of homogeneity. Logistic regression analysis was used to analyze the combined importance of risk factors, and intention to treat analysis had been used. Now, I would like to briefly explain the two types of analysis, the PERP protocol and the intention to treat analysis. So, suppose you have two groups, Group A and Group B. In each group, 100 people have been randomly selected. And at the end of the study trial, you find that 90 people are remaining in group A, whereas 92 people are remaining in group B, which means that 10 people and 8 people respectively have left from both the groups due to unknown reasons. Now, when you want to publish the results of your study trial, if you publish the results of the 90 or the 92 people, it is called per protocol analysis, and it does not take into account the fact that people have left from the study. Whereas if you publish the results of the 100 people, irrespective of whether they have left or not, so you just publish the results of all the 100 people, it is called intention to treat analysis. Now, intention to treat analysis is considered better than per protocol analysis because it takes into account the negligence of patients and it simulates a real life situation. So, coming to the results, Table 1 demonstrates human papillomavirus DNA in material from cases and controls. So, if you look at reactivity under non-stringent conditions, 91% cases were positive for HPV, for any HPV, as compared to 63% of controls. The difference in percentage positive in cases and controls amongst any HPV was not much when compared against different geographical areas. In case of HPV 16-18, 67% of cases were positive, whereas here 43% of controls were positive. Table 2 demonstrates the distribution of cervical cancer risk factors among cases and controls. So 53% of cases had a history of first intercourse at 16 years or younger, as compared to 34% of controls. History of cigarette smoking was given by 52% cases as compared to 27% controls. 64% cases had 2 or more sexual partners as compared to 47% controls. A more number of cases than controls had received no formal education, whereas a prior history of pap smear was more amongst control than cases. In Table 3, amount of HPV 16-18 DNA in materials from cases and controls have been demonstrated, and age is the variable here. So you have 3 groups: women less than 30 years of age, between 30 to 49 years of age, and above 50 years of age. So if you look at the positivity rates among cases, they are not very different. They are quite similar: 62%, 56%, and 75%. But in case of control women, the positivity rates increase with increasing age. Thus, the highest risk is amongst the younger women group, as indicated by the odds ratio 5.8, and they are at twice the risk of getting the infection as compared to women of older age group. Table 4 demonstrates the results of stepwise logistic regression analysis. So if you take the risk factor HPV 16-18, the odds ratio comes out to be 2.67, and 95% confidence interval is in between 1.07 to 6.70. Now, what this basically means is that the odds of exposure of HPV in cases is 2.67 times the odds of exposure of HPV in controls. And if you repeat the study 100 times, 95% of the times you'll get the values between 1.07 to 6.70. Similar is the case with age at first intercourse. The odds ratio comes out to be 2.36. But here the 95% confidence interval values lie between 0.96 to 5.80, which is not very significant. So, coming to discussion, a significant association was found between HPV 16-18 infection and cervical cancer. Now, in case control studies, there's a term called odds ratio, which is defined as the ratio of odds of exposure of disease in cases divided by the odds of exposure of disease in controls. Here there are multiple exposures such as HPV infection, age at first intercourse, smoking, number of lifetime sexual partners. Now the overall odds ratio comes out to be 2.7, which simply means that the odds of exposure of disease in cases was 2.7 times the odds of exposure of disease in controls. And the 95% confidence interval lies between 1.1 to 6.8. So for this study, the overall p-value is less than 0.05, which is statistically significant, but to a lesser extent, because the lower limit of confidence interval lies closer to 1. As you can see, it is 1.1. So age contributed as a major risk factor for HPV infection in younger controls, which were less than 30 years of age. So the most important risk factor for cervical cancer was infection with HPV 16-18, followed by age at first intercourse. Neither smoking nor number of lifetime sexual partners contribute significantly to the development of cervical cancer. I have used the Critical Appraisal Skills Program checklist to critically appraise the article, and I would like to answer some of the questions. Did the study address a clearly focused issue? Yes, it was focused in terms of the population study. The study detected a harmful effect, and the risk factors were clearly defined. Did the authors use an appropriate method to answer their question? Yes. Since there were multiple risk factors, a case control study was appropriate. Were the cases recruited in an acceptable way? Yes. The inclusion criteria was clearly defined, so which suggests a minimum selection bias, and the geographical area was also clearly defined. Were the controls selected in an acceptable way? Yes, I had mentioned earlier that random selection of controls had been done, so which suggests minimum selection bias. Also, the non-response of controls was low. However, there were lesser number of controls. Was the exposure accurately measured to minimize bias? Since interviews were conducted, there is a risk of recall bias, but the exposure was clearly defined and accurately measured. How large was the treatment effect? The overall odds ratio came out to be 2.7, which is a significant value. How precise was the estimate of the treatment effect? So to answer this question, I looked at the p-value and the confidence interval. The p-value came out to be less than 0.05, which indicates that the results were statistically significant. However, the lower limit of confidence interval lied closer to 1, so it is significant but to a much lesser extent. Also, the analysis used was intention to treat analysis, which takes into account, or let's just say it was used to evaluate the effect of subjects refusing to participate. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Muskan. Ma'am, would you like to comment on this or any feedback of yours?
Okay, see, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
First of all, should I ask the question or should I comment myself? It's a good effort. I would say it's a good effort, but from all your friends, what I would request is, many a times, what I'm feeling is even in your pre-club thing, when you are presenting as a the person who's presenting should be knowing the stuff. Now, just mentioning terms sometimes confuses the person who's listening to you for the first time. For example, if now she's presenting Muskan and saying that this was in such and such journal, was a high impact journal, or so what do you actually understand by an impact factor? Does she actually understand the meaning of an impact factor? Is it significant to make that statement when you are presenting here? Because see, When you are saying impact factor, how many of you who are listening to her know what is impact factor? If all of them are knowing about it, very good. But if most are not knowing what is an impact factor, and you make a statement which is not, which people don't understand, then it loses the sense. That's first. Second thing is, as a beginner, I think so you're doing a good job, but I would request you all to develop more on this. Okay. For example, Muskan, do you know what exactly is an odds ratio and a relative risk, and what's the difference between the two? Because that's very important in case control studies. Would Muskan like to state something?
Yes, ma'am. Odds ratio is used in case control studies, whereas relative risk is used in cohort studies.
Why do you think it is like that? Why is it that we are using OR for case control and relative risk for cohort studies? What is the difference between the two? Why can't I use one in the other place? You can actually use both the things in both the places.
Ma'am,
Okay.
in case control studies, the disease has already occurred. So when you're saying relative risk, so the disease has not yet occurred. So you're just saying that the risk of uh, developing the disease. So that's why you're using the relative risk in cohort studies, and you're using the odds ratio where the disease has already occurred and you're going back to find out the exposure.
You're going to find out the odds of a X risk factor being the
Yes.
cause of the disease which is happening. So what are the odds of having that risk factor being the cause is the odds ratio. Okay. So fine, good. Uh, if you have a p value associated with odds ratio and relative risk, what is the advantage of it?
Sorry, ma'am. Can you repeat your question?
What I was saying is, now you were also telling about p values, right? And you were
Yes,
telling
ma'am.
about confidence interval. So what is the importance of those with respect to each of your studies? Let's take your case control study.
Ma'am, the p-value is basically the probability of something happening. So if you say that the p-value is less than 0.05, that means the errors are minimum, and that's why you can accept the results and you can reject the null hypothesis. Whereas if it is greater than 0.05, then you cannot reject the null hypothesis because the errors are too high.
No, not necessarily. See, not necessarily. That's again a very vague statement. P value is actually a probability, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
So just you decide p values depending upon how much is the error which is acceptable to you in an X study or an X type of study which you are doing. So you might not accept 0.05 as a probability in X study, whereas you might consider 0.01 in another. So it's not that every time p value of 0.05 is important or
Yes, p should be
0.05 is
less
only
than
taking.
alpha. That's what I meant. Sorry, not 0.05, but it should be less than alpha, the defined value.
Right, now you are saying better. Fine. What is the importance of confidence interval when you have a p value with confidence interval?
So, ma'am, if the limits of the lower and the upper limits of confidence interval, if they are on either side of one, it is acceptable. But if you are saying that the confidence interval is crossing one, so for example, if I say the confidence interval is from zero point 0.5 to 1.5, so 95% of the times I can get values on either side of one. So
Right, now we are speaking better. Okay, Muskan, the other thing I would like to know is you appraised this case control study, and I would like I would like from you, if you have an opportunity, which type of study would you like to do? For which disease, for which effect?
ma'am, I would like to start with the basics. Like, obviously, the randomized control trials are the gold standard, but I would like to start with case control or maybe even observational studies at this point and then go further. So, the
No,
topic,
no, this is not what I meant. What I meant was you have to do a case control. I want to I want you to tell me what what study, what disease would you like to take up?
Ma'am, I would prefer lung cancer and find out, like, I know that it has already been studied upon a lot, but yeah, the topic interests me, so I would like to find out the risk factors for developing lung carcinoma.
What do you think is not available already? So that's exactly my point. See, when you are appraising a journal, also keep this in mind. In your CASP itself, it says really that what is the relevance of that journal and the study to you in your current scenario, right? So always look that this gives you a template that tomorrow if I have to study some disease or some newer aspect, because nobody would like to would allow you to do a study on lung cancer today, a case control, when you have so much information already available from 1950 onwards, isn't it? You just appraised a journal, there is another one who will be appraising similar background. So nobody is going to allow you do that. It will be ethically wrong to now subject so many people to so much of uh, information and all those risk of gathering the information. So this journal should be a background as a template for you, that okay, what is a disease in my current scenario which has a similar pattern, which is of similar type, and where not much information is available. So how do I go about doing that? You getting my point?
Yes, ma'am, I get it.
So that is what I'm. Otherwise, you guys are doing quite good. I think so. At your level, the basics are fine. You're starting small steps. There are small little things which I have preferred better, but I think so. You're doing good. Fine. Any other questions from the audience? I think so. You can take it that.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll start with the second presentation. Om, are you there?
Yes, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll start sharing my presentation now. Is the presentation visible?
Yes.
Okay, just a second. Yeah, so I am Om Thakkar from 2nd MBBS, SAID GS Medical College and KM Hospital. And I will be presenting and critically appraising an article on a study of etiology of carcinoma of the lung. This article was published in the British Medical Journal on December 13, 1952 by Dr. Richard Doll and A. Bradford Hill. And I have used CASP checklist for the critical appraisal of this article. So coming on to the introduction of the presentation, there was observation that there was increased deaths due to lung carcinoma in England and Wales between 1922 and 1947. So as this increase occurred, there were many possible hypotheses that were estimated for this increase. Some of them were that this increase might have been due to some carcinogens present in the atmosphere, or it might also have been due to occupational hazard. And one of the other hypotheses was it might have been due to smoking. So these same authors had published a preliminary report in 1950, but the limitation of that study was that they took only urban population of Greater London into account. There was no account or no study based on the rural population. And some previously studied it was studied in Germany and USA also, but their sample size was very small so as to get a conclusive evidence. Now, what was the aim of this study? The aim of this study was to study different risk factors with lung carcinoma, which were amount of tobacco smoked, duration of smoking, method of smoking. Method of smoking can be basically classified into pipe smoking or cigarette smoking. Pipe, as we in common language, it can be cigars. And other risk factors are occupation and social class of the patients, then place of residence of the patients, exposure to different forms of heating, and previous respiratory illnesses. This study was a retrospective case control study which was conducted through standardized interviews, and some special interviewers were hired for this study. Coming on to the population, there were two groups of patients. One were cases and another one controls. For cases, the inclusion criteria was that the patient must be suffering from lung carcinoma, while the exclusion criteria was age above 75 years. It was taken this because above this age, the data provided by the patient wasn't considered much reliable. Then patients suffering from other respiratory disorders or other carcinomas of chest were also excluded, and certain lung cancer patients with unknown origin of tumor, like the tumor must have originated at some other place, but lung carcinoma must have been caused due to metastasis. Such cases were also excluded from the study. Then certain patients were they were firstly diagnosed with lung carcinoma, but then the diagnosis was changed after further diagnostic techniques. Then for the control group, the patient should be either suffering from carcinomas of lung or carcinomas of stomach or large bowel, or even general medical and surgical patients admitted in the hospitals where the interviews were taken were also considered in the control group. Similarly, in the exclusion criteria, patients above the age of 75 years were excluded, and also patients suffering from other respiratory disorders were also excluded. For the sample size, initially 4342 patients were considered to be interviewed for the study, but finally there were 1465 patients in each case, and control group were finally decided. Why did it occur like this? As we can see over here, there were certain patients who had carcinomas of other spatial sites. Now, what does this mean? Carcinoma of other spatial sites means these were originating in the chest cavity, but these were not related to lung, like carcinoma of mediastinum or carcinoma of esophagus or throat. These were excluded from the study. Then even uncertain primary site carcinomas are also not considered, as we saw in the exclusion criteria. And coming to the control group, there were two control groups decided. One of them were match controls, and they were 1465 patients, while other controls weren't able to properly match with the cases patients. So these were not studied finally, and even 5 cases whose diagnosis was uncertain. The time period of the study was from April 1948 to February 1952. Now we'll talk about matching. How was matching done? The matching was 1-to-1 matching with one patient of control for each lung carcinoma patient, and the controls were similar in the same 10-year age group, same sex, and were admitted to the same health center where the interviews were conducted. We can see the matching in this table. Even it is perfectly matching. All the patients, they eliminated most of the confounding factors. Now, chi-square test was used to determine the association between the risk factors studied and lung carcinoma. And p-value was also used to find out the significance of the results. As we know, p-value is the probability of the null hypothesis being true. And this basically also accounts to the errors conducted while errors produced while conducting the study. And it was considered that p-value less than 0.05 is accounts for significant results. Now, one important thing which I would like to state here is that smoking habits were equated in terms of ounces of tobacco. As we saw, there were different methods of smoking which were studied, and each method of smoking, there must be less tobacco. The amount of tobacco in each method of smoking wasn't same. So in order to create a standardized way, they calculated in terms of ounces of tobacco, and then they converted into the number of standardized cigarettes, which were 1 ounce is equal to 26.5 cigarettes. Also, recall bias was eliminated in the study. Recall bias is the patient giving wrong data on subsequent interviews. This was eliminated by interviewing random 50 patients after 6 months of their initial interview, and it was found that majority of the more than 95% of the patients gave the same data. Now we'll study the results which were obtained. The most important result which was obtained was the amount of tobacco smoked. Now, as we can see here, we have two types of data available. One was the most recent amount of tobacco smoked regularly before the onset of present illness, And another one was average amount of tobacco smoked daily over 10 years preceding onset of the present illness. Both of these are different, and both of these were collected so as to verify the results of one another. As we can see here, as highlighted, the number of non-smokers in the lung carcinoma patients were very less as compared to number of non-smokers in the control group. It was 0.5 to 4.5%, while in the heavy smoking range, the percentage of patients in the lung carcinoma group was significantly high as compared to percentage of smokers in the control group. Similar results can be seen over here, that in a higher smoking group, in a more amount of tobacco smoked, the patients percentage of patients smoking were higher in the lung carcinoma group. This this data can also be verified by comparing the death rates which were due to lung cancer and plotting it with the amount of tobacco smoked. As we can see in this table, the general trend observed over here was that the death rate due to lung carcinoma increased with the amount of tobacco smoked and also increased with the age. As we can see here, the most profound findings can be seen in this column if we compare the age group. A graph was also plotted from the annual death rates from lung cancer in accordance with number of cigarettes smoked daily. We can see here that in cases of male, there was a linear graph was obtained, and it was directly proportional. While in female, the data available was very less, so we can't make, and we don't have any conclusive evidence for females, but still similar trends were observed. For duration of smoking, generally it was observed that the patients who had lung carcinoma started smoking at an early age. They smoked for more years, and they were they tended less to give up smoking. And in this also, we can see this in the data, but the difference isn't much significant. The significant difference can be observed in the number of years they have been smoking for, and it is in the lung carcinoma patients group. They have been if we see the less years of smoking, the percentage of patients was very less as compared to the control group, and this similar trend is observed even in females. Now we'll see method of smoking. There were basically two methods of smoking which were considered. One was cigarette smoking and one was pipe smoking, and it was studied. This was a new method this was a new risk factor which was studied that time. The previous studies didn't consider this factor. And as we can see here, pure pipe, what does pure pipe and pure cigarette means? Pure pipe means that the patient who is a pure pipe smoker hasn't smoked cigarette for more than a year, and similar occurs for pure cigarette patients. So as we can see here, that 3.9% of lung carcinoma patients were pure pipe smokers, while 6.9% of control patients were pure pipe smokers. So this, and the p-value for this data is less than 0.001. So this is absolutely significant, and we can see that the cases, the pure pipe, one conclusion arrived from this was that pure pipe smoking, though it leads to carcinoma of lung, it is relatively safer as compared to cigarette smoking. Over here, one query was raised. It was that in pipe, less amount of tobacco is used. So another data was collected, which was only of pure pipe smokers, percentages of pure pipe smokers at different levels of tobacco consumed. So even here we can see that in lung carcinoma patients, there were fewer pure pipe smokers as compared to pure cigarette smokers in control, as compared to pure pipe smokers in the control patients at each level of tobacco consumed. This can also be verified if we compare the death rate with method of smoking. There was a more death rate in cases of pure cigarette smokers as compared to pure pipe smokers. They also studied the place of residence of the patients. Now there were two hospitals. There were two groups of hospitals which were at which the interviews took place. One were the hospitals in Greater London, and one were the hospitals in provinces. Provinces were the areas were like the regional hospitals which catered to a large area outside London. So in this we can see that in provincial hospitals, if we see the patients of rural districts, there were less lung carcinoma patients as compared to control patients. And the p-value for this is also less than 0.05. So this is statistically significant, but the data for this is very less to come to an actually conclusive evidence. But the general trend was that seen here is that in rural areas, the lung carcinoma is less prevalent as compared to urban areas. So in previous studies, association of smoking and lung cancer was concluded, but association doesn't mean that smoking causes lung cancer. Association can also mean that smoking, that lung carcinoma can be caused due to smoking, or smoking habits can be increased, can be affected due to lung carcinoma. But this study proved that smoking actually was a causal agent in causing lung carcinoma. Why this occurred, why this was concluded? It was because people have been smoking for several years, but lung carcinoma, the diagnosis of detection of lung carcinoma must have occurred just a few years back. So it definitely shows here that first smoking occurred, and then it was a contributory factor in causing lung carcinoma. There were certain patients groups which were incorrectly thought to have carcinoma of the lung, and later the diagnosis was changed. And these people weren't excluded from the study. These were studied separately. And what were the advantages of studying them separately? First of all, when they were studied, the results found the trends of smoking in such patients that were found was similar to the control group. This actually indicates that there wasn't any interviewer bias, or even the patients did not exaggerate their smoking history. This indicates that because if they were initially they were diagnosed to be carcinoma of lung patients, but if there was interviewer bias present, the interviewers must have the trends observed here would have been similar to the trends observed in the lung carcinoma patient, but it wasn't so. So that bias was eliminated from here. Also, there was comparison of prevalence of lung carcinoma in urban and rural population, but this wasn't very strong evidence, though still it concluded to an extent that prevalence in rural population is less as compared to urban population. Now, this study was actually a very landmark study, and it had a huge impact on the smoking rates in the UK. After this study was published, there was a direct causality associated between. There was a direct causality registered between smoking and lung cancer. And after this study was published, as we can see here, for that the prevalence of smoking halved between 1950 and 1990 for men in early middle age, and even death rate fell rapidly. So this study had a huge impact on not only in UK, it had a huge impact on the global level too, and it contributed to declining rates of smoking. So after after conducting this study, we can arrive to the conclusion that there was a direct association between lung cancer and the following: between lung cancer and the amount of tobacco smoked, the duration of smoking, and method of smoking. While there wasn't any association between lung cancer and cigarette type, social class and occupation, exposure to various forms of heating, and previous respiratory illnesses. Cigarette types, there was even the different brands of cigarettes were also studied over here, but there wasn't any much difference between different brands. Social class and occupation were also studied, but there wasn't much difference. Previous respiratory illnesses was studied, and it was found that patients with chronic bronchitis and pneumonia tended to increase the risk for lung carcinoma, but the results weren't much significant, and the conclusion wasn't arrived. Now, I have critically appraised this article using the CASP checklist, and the strengths of this article were that the sampling size was very huge. 1465 patients were studied, and such large sampling size wasn't used in any of the previous studies. Plus, it studied a lot of risk factors. Also, it studied the risk factors in both urban and rural areas, while the previous studies had studied only in urban areas. Also, matching was done with minimum selection and recall bias. The limitations of this study were that data collected on women was very less, so we can't come to a conclusion about the association between smoking and lung cancer between women, and they also didn't consider some particular smoking habits. Like the studies conducted after this, it was observed that women tended to smoke less cigarette. The women tended to not smoke full cigarette. They used to smoke about half to 3/4 of the cigarettes and throw the rest of them away. They didn't consider this factor in the study. Also, they didn't use the confidence interval, which is actually a very huge drawback of this study. They also didn't calculate odds ratio for each of the risk factors. Also, there was no justification given for choosing patients with cancers of stomach and large bowel in the control group. And the population which was studied were the diseased patients only. There wasn't any general healthy population in the control group. And yeah, it was a retrospective study, and it had its own advantages. But one of the disadvantages of using retrospective study was that they couldn't study the progress of lung carcinoma on cessation of smoking. Of the later studies studied this factor, and this study didn't study this factor. So this was also a drawback of this study. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Om. Smriti ma'am, would you like to comment on this in brief? Ma'am, are you?
Yes. Why do you think it is still a landmark study? You did tell about a lot of limitations, especially the choice of their, factors and all those things which you were mentioning. Why do you think it is still a landmark study? And it is indeed.
Yeah, actually, it was the reason I chose this study. It was a landmark study. It was because this study had actually a very huge impact on the global level. People started leaving smoking after the study was published. In the later studies conducted, it was observed that there was a huge decline in the smoking trends in UK and even at the global level.
Okay, so basically what I would like to state is that you might have limitations in your study, but that does not every time may be a reason for thinking that my study doesn't have any value. There are lots of things in real time which is important when you start a research and when you think about a research. For example, in this case, till 1952, when this study was actually published, people were not considering smoking so seriously as a health hazard. And that is why when we say that it was a landmark study with that respect, that it brought this into the forefront. And this is what exactly I wanted to highlight also, is when you are deciding on a research, then it is not necessarily that you will get the ideal of the situations, or you will get the ideal of the things which as respect to your cases, your controls, or your data, or your matching, which the case control says. But what is important is with what intent you have started the research, with what intent you have, what is the thought process behind it. So you will be seeing that there are a lot of studies happening at the moment with respect to COVID, right? So
Yeah.
that is also an sort of reflection that the impact of their study depends on all these factors. Okay, so that is what I wanted to bring to the forefront. Similarly, there are certain things also which you should remember when you are appraising a journal, that the CASP also says is what was the intent of the researcher when they started the study and what they actually present in the results. If there is too much of discrepancy between the two, always remember that this is a big flaw in one of the in the studies. You will see this and you observe this in many of the studies, not just in this but in randomized control trials also, that the objective which they state initially might be very different from what the results are stating now. So similarly in your situation, there were other aspects also they have taken, why they have taken those cancers, GI cancers and all those in picture, they have not stated, which should be observed. Otherwise it becomes that you're just collecting data, your research is not thorough. Okay, and the
Yeah.
confidence interval which you did say is very important. Okay, so I think so
Yes, ma'am.
that's about it from my end. And a good job, right? Nice job.
Thank you,
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am. So for the post club discussion, actually Akash had to leave for some reason. So if you have any questions from the presenters who presented the articles, you can ask freely. Om and Muskan are here. If you have any doubts or if you want to confirm anything, you can ask freely. Ma'am has also left. Mm. Even if you have some doubts about the concept of case control study, uh, you can ask that. We can try answering them. I guess there are no questions. So, okay, we'll end the club. Uh, uh, so, we are grateful to our speakers, Om and Muskan, and also Akash, who's not here, but for such good presentations. And your patient listening made this event successful. So, we hope you did get to learn more about research from this discussion. Stay safe, happy researching. We have concluded the meeting.